Shalom and welcome back to TLV Talk. We're here to speak with Rabbi Shawn Moir today. He is a wonderful rabbi at Baruch Hashem in Dallas, and you are going to be so amazed. He's one of our original translators of the TLV text. So we talk about translation in this episode, but we also talk about how God gets a hold of us and works through events in our childhood and our upbringing to draw us into the saving knowledge of Yeshua the Messiah. I can't wait for you to hear his testimony and to dig into the Bible together.
Your name is above all powers, above all kings. Your name.
Shalom and welcome back to TLV Talk. I have Rabbi Shawn Moir with me today. So excited to have you here. We've been friends a really long time. Shawn, tell me where it is that you are currently ministering.
I currently serve at Baruch Hashem Messianic Synagogue in Dallas.
In Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
And you spent time starting a congregation in other parts of the country. What other parts of the country have you been ministering?
Well, I grew up in New York, so originally when I came to faith, I started doing ministry there and then recognized the need for some more education and found myself in Springfield, Missouri,
Right.
where I was introduced to Messianic Judaism in a more favorable way. I was always averse to it growing up, of course, and began to minister in Messianic Judaism with Dr. Ray Gannon. After that, after seminary, moved to Southern California, where we planted a congregation in Simi Valley, and were there for 5 years before coming here.
I want to tell you why I'm so excited about having Shawn here. I had a few minutes to talk with you before we were taping. Our paths have crossed many times throughout the Bible being done.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember me bringing this prototype with
do.
me. Do you remember?
Very clearly.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so exciting. So Dr. Gannon was actually integral to us getting the Bible project done because I was not willing to do it because I was so ignorant if he wouldn't be by my side and help. And so because he is, or currently still spends a lot of his time encouraging the relationships between the AG and the Messianic movement, he has been such a fantastic scholar. He was one of the first people that had a Jewish outreach in California, in LA,
Yes.
I think, right?
Yes.
And so he and his wife, Cassiani, are very good friends of mine. And so when we started the Bible project, I came up with this prototype. I took a Bible that was being used in our community. I made this silly little pamphlet. I mean, it's so funny because we market all kinds of things now. But can you see anything less attractive and less inspiring than this? It's like all words, no pictures. Had no idea what we were doing back in the beginning. But we had a dream for making the Messianic Jewish Family Bible. We wanted one that had pictures in it. And so I had the artist that I found, and we were working on Messianic terminology and I did surveys to figure out what people were using in the movement because I was a young mother. So but when I started this is kind of at the same age and space that you guys are at in congregational leadership. But I was a mother of young children going, how do I get a Bible for our kids? And that was the only thing that people knew about me for 20 years? I think I talked about it. But in meeting you at one of the Messianic Leaders Roundtables, I remember a discussion starting about reaching across the generations. And that was when all those materials were coming out about labeling generations.
Yeah.
And I don't know, now that it's been, a decade since then, I don't know that that's helpful. I think it's divided us more than. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and if I could just say a few thoughts that arose while you were speaking. First, talking about the old materials. And it's funny for me, as someone who wasn't part of that generation, to look back, even some of Dr. Gannon's writings when he was a young man. And he would say something like, you could use those as a paperweight or to hold the door open or things like that. Because he's progressed since those times.
Yeah.
But looking back, I'm reminded of something a boss of mine used to say, that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you can figure out how to do it better. And
I love that.
you could really see that progression in our movement, which gives me some hope for coming generations, that we can grow and begin to excel in things, even if we've done them poorly in the past. And I remember meeting you. You were presenting on the TLV or whatever iteration it was
Right.
at that time.
Right.
And I remember sitting there, yes, as a younger married man with my wife Val. And one of the things that really captured me was your verve, your spark, and especially as a woman, to see the way that you addressed a room that was predominantly male leaders, and they were all focused upon you. They were all motivated by what you were saying. And so for me, one of the first things was having my wife there, who really may have felt like an outsider in Messianic Judaism. She's not from a Jewish background. She was born in India. And she, at that point, she was trying to figure out, who am I in this world? So for you to be there speaking so passionately about something and painting a picture for everyone that people can lay hold of was a very special moment, I think, for both of us in the movement, and made it something that I was more eager to be a part of when that opportunity came.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. That's really kind. I don't know where to go now.
I don't know if I answered your
You're
question
so
at all,
kind,
but
though. But so let me try to explain to the people that are watching the podcast why you're precious to me. Because I have met in my lifetime about 300 Messianic rabbis, about 300 Jewish believers in Messiah, and children of intermarriages. By intermarriage, I mean one Jew, one Christian. That was what Mark and I were at. And we were almost adopted into the movement the um, as the offspring of the initial leaders of the movement. So Mark and I we call ourselves, we're part of the Isaac generation. We weren't the Abrahams. We weren't the ones that started the Messianic move that happened out of the Jesus movement. But we did get adopted in so tightly that it became our whole world. And we lived a Messianic lifestyle from the beginning of our marriage. But like you said, as we grew up in the movement, we saw people come and go. We saw leaders come and go. And we saw children that grew up in the movement, like the synagogue that you go to was raised up by Marty, right?
yes.
And Marty Waldman. And Marty Waldman's son, Ari, now leads that congregation.
Yes.
And so we have entered into the place where there's multiple generations of Jewish believers that are building community. The thing that fascinates me about remembering meeting you and Val, and your wife Val is a beautiful person. She's in education. She's a science teacher, right?
She is.
Yeah. So she's just a beautiful person and very zealous, which I love. But I remember you guys being so young and so fresh and jumping in with both feet. But like my husband, who's a first generation believer in Messiah, that was also kind of your experience, yeah? So can you give us, so we see you coming into it. We've been in it for, 15 years going, we got to do something for kids. And meanwhile, we see you growing up in it. And so for me, I'm so proud of the work that you've done to educate yourself, to seriously invest in being part of moving the agenda forward of the revelation of Messiah Yeshua to the Jewish people, but also to this enormous ever-growing group of people who get Romans 9, 10, and 11, and they realize that there's a reason the Jewish people are here, that having the Jewish people here does in fact prove that the same God of Abraham is still alive and moving on the earth today through Messiah Yeshua. But that revelation, coming to it, can you tell us how you mentioned something earlier that you weren't favorable toward Messianic Judaism, and then you became favorable.
Yes.
That is a beautifully polite way of saying the same thing I say all the time, which is we got kicked out of the family, kicked out of the inheritance, kicked out of everything. Because
Yes.
in our generation,
That's also
you
true.
literally got, thrown out.
Yeah.
But tell me what it was like for you and explain to
Mhm.
us how you came to faith in Messiah. Because I think you're a great representation of what our movement needs, which is educated, on fire leaders, couples together in ministry, husbands and wives, that can make a difference and raise children in a healthier way.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Growing up on Long Island, now, so my mother was the first daughter of an Orthodox rabbi. My grandfather would kind of go back and forth between Orthodox and conservative congregations that he would lead. I've heard him say in an interview I watched with him or read that he preferred smaller congregations because he didn't need the aggravation. But in any case, he was a rabbi for over 50 years, maybe closer to 60. And my mother was raised in, Woodstock generation. I mean, she was at Woodstock as a young teenager, and she was seen as a rebellious child, very brilliant, but rebellious nonetheless. And she, after having a mixed experience within the synagogue world, she married a non-Jew, which was very controversial in the family.
Oh, I'm sure.
And my father is not a Christian, although he comes from a nominally Christian family. I think there were Catholics in the past, but they were, my father is still more agnostic than anything. And that's how I was raised predominantly.
And if we wanted to tell our viewers what agnostic means, could you explain that word to us?
Yeah, basically, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not. We'll find out one day. But let's treat everyone kindly, and
let's treat people kindly. I like that.
Moral values. Believed in embracing all cultures, which is something that's probably helped me in even looking at Messianic Judaism and even different sects of Christianity or Judaism, and starting with a favorable view, at least.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was very much instilled in me from both of my parents. And so I wasn't raised in a religious household. We didn't attend synagogue except maybe once a year for High Holy Days. If that, we'd celebrate with my religious family, my uncle or my grandfather at Pesach and other times.
So were those family gatherings? So you did family gatherings like
Yes.
Passover. I don't think Christians understand that Passover is really supposed to be dinner theater at home for your kids.
Yes, it was just at my grandfather's house.
Yeah.
And it was.
But it's one of the most important things because it's not just a holiday, it's a telling of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and it would start late and go even later. It was just a long time to sit around the table for me as a kid. And everything we experience seems normal when we're a kid until we get separated and then think back on it.
Okay, say that again. Everything seems normal when we're a kid until we separate from it and look back.
Yeah,
it's really wise.
Or have the perspectives of others and begin to compare that. But in any case, my mother held on to certain aspects of maybe Jewish education, where she wanted us to learn Hebrew and go through a bar and bat mitzvah, even though we weren't part of a synagogue, which I didn't realize was odd growing up. This was just the norm for me. So what was funny, she needed to hire a Hebrew teacher for us. And the only person locally that would actually come to our house, which was a fairly dysfunctional house. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and it was a tumultuous house. Now I realize in retrospect. So someone who is willing to come into this kind of dysfunctional home, the only person was actually a Messianic rabbi, female Messianic rabbi.
Wow.
That's
like unheard of back then.
It's
rare. You might as well be like a polka dot horse at that point.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. But maybe she was enough of an outcast already that she didn't mind crossing certain lines, and I don't know. But my mother had a preliminary conversation with her before she started teaching my sister and I Hebrew. And she told her, I don't want any of your Yeshua stuff. Don't push your agenda on my kids, just teach them Hebrew and go home. And her name was Carol, and she agreed with the premise, and that's what she did. So I didn't know about her faith. She was a good Hebrew teacher. She invited us to her wedding. So this was the only time I saw the other side, and they were singing about Yeshua and dancing. And my mother came from behind. I was about maybe 10 years old at the time. And she like put her fingers in my ears and covered my eyes.
No way!
Because
That's crazy!
she didn't want this Meshigas to like permeate my being. You know, she didn't want this.
But the fact that she knew that music and event would be something that you remember, I don't think that parents understand that there are things that get sealed in your mind forever.
What's funny about it, I don't know if I even would have paid attention to it.
Right, unless she had made a mess out of it.
Made a statement that you can't watch this. Like,
Right,
don't do this.
Right.
You know?
I get it, though.
And so it's not that it made that thing appealing. It made that thing curious.
Oh.
And I feel like my aversion to Messianic Judaism or Jews for Jesus or anything that was like crossing boundaries between Christianity and Judaism I was averse to it, although I was never told explicitly to be averse to it. It was something that was more caught than taught. You know?
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because I would love it if women would begin to understand that they are teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be called a teacher to be a teacher.
That's true.
And what you imprint is so much more long lasting than what you actually teach.
Yes.
What you teach can be argued with. Mm-hmm. What you imprint lasts a lifetime.
Yes.
And I think that's where the great value of working together as a team, husband and wife, and that being seen more in ministry is so important, because I love hearing and learning from rabbis, but I think we don't value in a more Christian mindset the role of the woman in the religious imprinting of children is not as much talked about. We don't even really have a word for it, because I was thinking, I had a women's Bible study the other night, and I was asking them, what do we call it? If you've been trained your whole life that you're not supposed to teach because you're a woman, you should sit down and shut up, then how does that equate with the fact that we've been teaching our children since they were at the breast, excuse me,
Right.
and we're born teachers. So to tell us we can't teach confuses us and makes us feel unwelcome. So I love what you're sharing today, because what your mother did was she taught you that there was a truth, that there was something out there that she was concerned about.
Yes.
And it causes you to be curious. That's a natural, that by the way is evil inclination. It's like, well, okay, just don't even show them evil, because goodness knows we'll be inclined toward it.
Right.
Yeah, so go ahead. I love what you're talking about, though. It's fascinating.
Yes, so, and I went through my own, upbringing of, depression after the divorce and going through, other social situations in school, and kind of finding myself in an aviation class in my senior year. And I was also dating a Muslim girl through high school that lived with me.
Wow.
She's actually the reason, in retrespect, that I stopped doing drugs, because she was not.
God works in mysterious ways.
It is. It's a funny thing to think about.
But he does. All the whack stuff that we do, he finds a way to turn it for good when we follow him.
I just kind of meandered through my youth. She did dump me after high school, which kind of sent me into a kind of brooding phase. But at this point, I had a career path. I was looking into airport management. And my color blindness, which I also inherited from my grandfather, in addition to my shaky hands, it prevented me from being either a professional pilot, because I was flying at the time, or an air traffic controller, which I had been able to intern with the FAA as a young man, and I had interest, but this condition prevented me from doing either of those things. So I needed to find a third path. And I ended up staying local on Long Island and going to school for airport management, where I met my wife.
I never knew this about you.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly interesting fact. Go ahead.
So I met my wife in the first year of college. It was very memorable in New York because it was the same semester of 9/11 in 2001. So
You're kidding. Wow. How did that shake you, having seen 9/11?
yeah, well, I was just thinking back on how these crises unite countries, at least for maybe a short period of time. But of course, I remember where I was when I saw the planes crashing, and I remember talking with Val about this. So it's kind of an indelible mark on our early relationship. But the thing that made more of a mark on me, besides world events, was really her faith. And
Wow.
although I wasn't interested in Christianity, there was something about her character, her moral character, that impressed me
Yeah.
because I was 19 at the time. So I wasn't accustomed to meeting young women that had some kind of moral backbone. And this really challenged me to assess my own morals, especially as we were getting to know each other more and things were coming out that were maybe deficient in my own character. Not that she was necessarily
No, but that
pointing them
you
out,
were
but just in
recognizing it.
contrast, I would
Yeah.
feel it. So we had a relationship, which was partly scandalous on her part because I didn't realize this at the time, but her parents were missionaries from India to North America.
They were
And
missionaries to North America.
yes.
Can we just take a moment and say we need a lot of those? For the record, we would like missionaries to America.
Yes.
America needs help and somebody should do something.
I
So
agree.
talking about Jesus here is a great idea and people should come and try to straighten out the moral compass of our country. Go ahead,
Yes.
sir.
So I didn't realize at that time the way that she was being wayward in even associating with
Oh,
me
yeah.
and having this interest in me, and we were building a relationship slowly. I didn't realize the turmoil that was causing for her at home and her missionary parents who loved me, but then there was caution.
Well, they're putting their fingers in her ears, right?
Exactly.
They're going, don't listen to him. We're not sure he's the best choice.
Right. So
I added that, by the way. That is
no. And I think they liked me on a personal level, but then I understand their objections to our relationship, and I certainly wasn't looking to get married after my parents' marriage fell apart. And I remember talking to my dad about it. I was about 20, and he said, "What, are you stupid? Why would you get married? You're so young."
I was really raised, I had no intention of getting married.
Yeah.
It was not on my radar. I was raised by a single mom and it was just literally not on my radar.
Mhm.
I didn't see men that way. I didn't see marriage that way. I had no way. So when I asked God to help me and he sent Mark and I meet this Jewish family, again, I start realizing, oh, I'm kind of a jerk. I'm kind of a horrible person. And you start going, oh, okay, maybe I should, I could move toward a more, more likable person.
Yes.
But you don't really realize it at the time. And I appreciate that you mentioned that you had a season of depression after your parents divorced as a youth, because I think that's another thing that is not ever discussed is that divorce is so common now that we don't realize that it doesn't affect the kids only when they're adults and when they become married.
Right.
It affects our view of marriage and our view of that, and it encourages me that I don't think I looked back at that. I think I'll revisit that in my life and see if maybe I was struggling with those things at that age. But I know it definitely changed my views of what marriage was. And until I saw a better marriage, till I saw my rabbi and his wife and want to be like them, and you really do look for models when you don't know what to do.
Right.
But rather than looking on your phone and reading an article about what good marriage should look like, it's much easier to follow a good model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was something about, even though if she would approach me with things about the faith, I wasn't interested. Like on paper, I wasn't interested. But then it was intriguing to see the way that she lived out her faith. And it was about a year and a half into our relationship that it basically came to a point of a decision. because if we were going to progress, from her view, if we were going to progress in this relationship, we would need to be serious about it, meaning marriage is in our future, and we could not get married with me being like atheistic or agnostic.
100%.
And so my
You were
thought-
atheistic? You'd call yourself atheistic?
Yeah, I suppose I prayed for in fourth grade that a certain girl in my class would marry me or something like that. But I didn't have a serious spiritual life.
That is so weird. So what you just said, let me see if I can just spit back to you what you just
Sure,
said.
sure.
So you said that in fourth grade,
Yeah.
you were thinking about marriage, but then
That's
after
right,
the
yeah.
divorce, you were depressed and feeling like it was worthless.
Yeah.
But realize
Hey, that was before fourth grade was before
it
the
happened.
Divorce,
Yeah. But I'm telling
Never
you
thought
that.
of that before.
Yeah, but it's funny if you think about
I
it.
had more traditional values at the fourth
Before
grade.
that, right? Okay, great. So now you've gone from, this is just fascinating, because I don't think people realize what kids take away
Yeah.
from those experiences, and so that's a good one. So okay, so I want it.
Having revelation
Are
about
you-
my young self.
Yeah,
now.
it's good though,
Yeah.
because if we had more revelation about our young self,
Yeah.
we might do better parenting. I don't know, just a thought. So go ahead.
Wow, that's interesting. I feel like I'm in a therapist office.
No, this is exciting.
I, it's a place I'd like to be. I could use it. But in any case, we went through this kind of fraught period where we were
Fraught period?
fraught.
What does that mean?
Like we were at odds with one another. We cared for each other, but there was a conflict.
Yeah.
There was this,
Yeah.
irreconcilable conflict. And during this time, I, for the first time, felt convicted about sin in my life. And it just happened one day. And I actually confessed something to Val that I thought she should know. And I'd never said it to her before. But so growing up, my father was a magazine delivery man, among other things, newspapers, books, magazines. But just most of it, probably 90% of what he delivered was pornography, because that was the industry back in the day. It was before the internet was a big thing.
That was when they covered it with the paper.
Usually
Right?
So my dad would organize magazines. I mean, I can remember I'd be 5 years old. My dad would be organizing his deliveries in the living room, and certain ones would be turned over. Usually they'd have a cigarette ad or something on the back. And as a 5-year-old, I'd be like, what's that one? Because some of them were just turned up and you see it's
Yeah.
People Magazine or Sports Illustrated. What are these ones that are upside down? What are these ones that my dad's trying to shield from me? So if he'd get a call and leave the room or something. And so I, became exposed to pornography at a very young age.
Oh my gosh.
To where it was just a very normal thing. You could sell them in school and make a pretty penny. All the other kids were interested in it too. So,
okay, this conversation is very
I know this
has
wasn't where-
really. But do you understand that the same turning over the magazine is the same with your?
Yes,
It's the
don't
same.
look at this.
Right, and that's exactly. But parents don't
Forbidden
realize.
fruit.
Right. But guess what? You said it. You just
Uh-oh.
said it. You just said it. You just said it. Forbidden fruit. Just being told not to eat something in the garden.
Yeah.
Just don't eat this one thing. Just
Everything else is
freaking one.
fine.
Eat whatever you want, but this
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that we want. But the forbidden fruit really is innocence. Is losing your innocence
Yeah.
and losing and children and we have to really recognize that if we don't protect their innocence
Mhm.
in ways that don't intrigue them. I
Correct.
like that you use
It's-
the word intrigue.
Yeah.
But this is fascinating because this is the very thing that I have pitched my tent. This is where I have built my sukkah. I have built my sukkah on Mount Zion, waiting for Messiah to return, planted there saying, I'm not on my watch. I'm going to do something that makes life safer for children. At the end of the day, core value, please do not defile children. Do not defile them with things they are not ready to see, they are not ready to hear. Don't think you're not the most important voice as their parent. And what you're saying and what you're sharing, I knew you as a young man that was following God.
Mhm.
But what God, the way that God protected you and how horrible this could have gone for you if, because look at what you were exposed to. My mother, a short little thing that I don't normally talk about is, I wrote about it in my testimony book, but my father had a heroin addiction. My mother grew up in the home of an alcoholic, and my mother eventually was able to share with me that she had been inappropriately touched as a child.
Yeah.
Let's make it simple. Nothing too horrible, just horrible enough to be horrible.
Yeah.
But when my mother found my father, right, there was this, my mother grew up in a house of alcoholics. So my dad was not just a heroin addict, but what's acceptable in front of people to hide the heroin is to drink. And so it's the acceptable thing in public that shields the really evil stuff underneath it. And so I find it really important to recognize that and how it affects children. So you may think what you're doing, don't eat the cookie, but then they see you eating cookies after they go to bed. They get up to go to the bathroom and you're in the other room. The point is what it is that we want to, as we develop children, as children grow, we want to give them safe places and safe experiences. But what we don't realize is that our own failings are cracks in the armor that the enemy moves in. So I find your willingness to share that really, I'm very grateful. Keep talking. I love your story.
So at this point, when I'm in college and Val and I are dating, I hadn't mentioned any of this to her because I knew it would not be acceptable to her. It was normal for me growing up, but I became aware that this would not be acceptable for her. So, but I'd like to be candid and honest, especially if, we're in a serious relationship and we're talking about marriage and these kinds of things. So I thought I should tell her about this. And we used to wait until her parents went to bed so we could have these like deep talks. And I remember it was a summer night. It was June 18th of 2003. And I shared this with her, that I had amassed such a collection by this point. I mean,
a collection of magazines?
Pornography videos, magazines, just over the years. And so I mentioned it to her. And I thought she would disapprove, but I didn't realize with what force she would disapprove. So
that's so true.
I told her, and her jaw dropped, like literally like a cartoon. And I wasn't expecting that. I thought we'd just continue like the rational conversation about this. So when her jaw
rational conversation.
Yeah, because for me, I was somewhat proud of myself at that point because I had not cheated on her with another girl. There were no other girls. And for me, that was probably a first, right? So I thought that was commendable. I was kind of, patting myself on the back, if you will. These were just magazines, videos or something. And so I thought I should clear the air, but it would probably be dismissed. And here her jaw was on the floor. So
she's already invested all this time thinking you're the guy.
Right, exactly.
But you have this serious issue that in our world is like verboten.
In my world, it wasn't very serious. In her world, it was extremely serious, right? Like we came from different worlds. Yes. So I didn't know what to say. So I said, you can slap me if you want. And she just took the opportunity.
No way.
Did. Yeah, she's bold, like you say, and I've never said that to her again.
I would imagine. Yeah. I would imagine.
I stopped using that line. So.
And
oh my gosh.
Like I said, I didn't realize the impact it would have on her, but seeing the impact it had on her impacted me.
Yes.
And I felt horrible after that. And I really began to think about what is it that I've been doing. And so she kicked me out of the house, and it was after 1 a.m. I mean, it was the middle of the night. I drove home. I was living at my mother's house, and it was about 10, 15 minutes away. And I lived in my mother's basement. In the closet in my bedroom, I took it just happened to be the night that garbage was going out. It might have been Wednesday night. I forget what night it was. But I took like a 50-gallon trash bag, kind of used for leaf cleanup and stuff like this. I went down to my bedroom, to the closet, and it was just basically filled with pornography. And I filled this 50-gallon bag with pornography. And I threw it over my back.
You know, I, the only analogy I have
I
is
don't even know.
jolly
where
old Saint Nick, but I know that's not. But I carried it outside, and I remember it was like a light drizzle. It was kind of starting to rain a little bit. But for the first time in my life, I felt convicted about sin in my life. I've never experienced this feeling before. It was completely novel.
Wow.
And it just so happened that one of the pails was basically empty. And there was enough room for me to drop this in there.
Right.
And so I went from dropping it in the pail that was on the curb to getting down on my mother's front lawn. I remember I didn't care that it was raining. I didn't care about my clothes.
Oh, honey.
And I just got down on my knees on her front lawn, and I asked Jesus to forgive me of my sins and to be my savior. I just felt like I knew that much at that point.
Wow.
And it was like a weight immediately lifted
Yes.
off me.
Yes.
And I was just sitting there like weeping, and I was there a while. And then I saw there was this cat. I always used to kick it off my property. I think it even looked like it's pregnant or something, but I just always used to, boot it off the property. Not physically kicking it, but like shooing it away. And I thought, why am I so cruel to this cat? So I began to like welcome it over, and it would kind of walk around me, and I'd pet it. And the third time it walked around me, I'd pet it. And now I know cats can't take too much stimulation. I was never a cat person, but it kind of like bit down on my arm, and then I shook it off. And I was there thinking, what am I doing? It's like 3 a.m. I'm now in the middle of the street with this cat, like in the rain, having this weird moment. And so I just went in, like I showered, and I called Val, and she used to screen her calls on the answering machine. She was still up, because we just had this event.
So this was the same night?
It was the same.
Get out of Dodge the same night.
Oh yeah, it was immediately after. And because I went home from her house weeping and feeling convicted about sin, and the first thing I did was fill up that trash bag and bring it out. So I thought, and as far as I knew, our relationship was over. But I thought, at least I should tell her about this event. I feel like something just happened. And I wasn't aware that she'd been praying for it for, about 1.5 years with my professors and stuff like that. But,
oh, wow.
My aviation professor.
Your aviation professor's praying for you to get a revelation about God.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, we did ministry together in the following years.
Really?
He still streams services at Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
I love that.
That's another story. But I felt like I should tell her about what just happened. And I did. And on her answering machine, I think I can't even imagine what her parents would have come into. They had listened to the little tape. But she picked up pretty quickly. And I told her what happened. And she acted like she hadn't been praying for me for 1.5 years.
Right.
But she said, if you want, our family's going to a funeral tomorrow in Philadelphia, and you can come. I was like, yes, let's go. Let's go to this funeral. So we went to, it was about a 3-hour drive to Philadelphia. It was an African-American preacher woman whose husband had passed.
Wow.
I'd never met them before. They were friends of Val's family. Val had, her parents were ministers. So I was there. I was the only, Val, she's Indian, so they can kind of blend in different cultural contexts. I can't. So
yeah,
I was the only person of my complexion in the place. And because I was seated with her family, they were honored guests, and I was with them. So I ended up being like almost the first person to get up and view the body.
Oh,
And
you don't do that in Judaism. You don't look at dead bodies. That's
well,
so weird that you would do that.
I had Catholic family too on my father's side, so that didn't faze me.
Wow.
But I didn't know what to do. And it was a Pentecostal funeral also. So they were like singing and dancing. That was far into me.
That was just seemed so wild to you.
Jewish and Scottish funerals, they're very somber.
Yes.
You know, you either go out to drink afterwards or you wear, you know.
Right. You cover the mirrors, you
Right.
said Shiva, there's
Yes.
things you do.
Exactly.
And you move through the mourning process, which
Yes.
for the record, I find very helpful.
Yes.
The party after somebody dies is hard for me to, I mean, I get it, but I don't feel it.
It was foreign to me, although, so I had to view the body maybe first. I was one of the first ones, and I didn't know what to do. So I was studying Kung Fu at a Buddhist temple in New York at this time.
I did Buddhism. I totally vibe that.
I went in front of the body and did a Kung Fu bow and said,
You're kidding.
Omi Tofu, which they used to teach us to say, and it means praise be to Buddha. So that was just, I didn't even know what it meant. That's just what they would tell you to say.
You were really needing some discipleship.
So, yes. And I think Val was just there like, I don't know this guy. But we went back to the house after, and, you know, they had all the soul food and everything. And it was just a very warm environment. And Sister Beecham, the new widow, called me over and she said, I heard something wonderful happen to you this morning. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, God.
And it
bless
just
you.
shook me that this woman who had just lost her husband, they had been married 40, 50 years. She just lost her husband. You know, we're there to, you know, remember his life, and that she was kind of reaching out to me across a cultural divide. You know,
Yeah.
I grew up in New York in a very multicultural
me too.
environment, but still, it just really struck me that she cared about me in that moment.
Yeah.
And ministry began from that point. You know, she ministered something to me, and then I suppose I felt the freedom in my newfound faith to minister to others. So we got home from Philadelphia, and there was another message on Val's answering machine when we got back to her house. It was my mother, and she was crying. And my childhood friend, he was like a brother to me for about 7 years of my upbringing. He had committed suicide.
Oh my gosh, Shawn, how horrible.
So his funeral was the next day. And I went to that funeral, and I went through a period in my upbringing where I was an outcast, and it was my home was highly dysfunctional, and Keith was the last one to kind of hold on to our friendship until the very end, until I was just completely ostracized. And he, at one point at around 12 or 13, abandoned me. And it was, you know, things got violent and everything. And it was very strange because we've had such a close relationship. And I learned at this point that he had developed schizophrenia. And, but he had somewhere around the age of 12 or 13, and then now at the age of 18 or 19, I think he was 18 still, he had killed himself in his parents' garage. So I was there, and all these others from the neighborhood that I used to be terrified of, because, you know, they used to gang up on me. I couldn't leave my house. They were there, and they just come and weep on my shoulder.
Oh,
And,
wow.
you know, for some of them, I mean, they had the marks of what appeared to be drug use. And so it was a revelation for me in that moment that I was here to minister to others.
Wow.
And I was no longer scared of these people. Like it was a new identity.
I believe that. I
Yes.
believe that coming to Messiah is a new identity.
Yes.
And I want you to know that, you know, I could talk to you for another 8 hours,
Sure.
but we're wrapping up for
Yes.
right now. And we're going to, please join us for the after show. What I want to, is there anything you want to add to your story before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to connect the dot and hopefully answer your first question, or one of them, is so it was only through starting to do ministry and learning that I didn't know much about the Bible, learning that I didn't know much about ministry, that I was a novice, even though there were all these opportunities available, that I realized the need to go to seminary. And I wasn't running towards Judaism. I was more interested in Christianity. And because of my upbringing, I thought they had nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
And it was only through going to a Christian seminary in Missouri, of all places, in the middle of nowhere, and meeting Dr. Ray Gannon, that I realized that these two worlds weren't as divergent as
That's
I thought.
right.
So that that aversion that I had to all things Messianic Jewish or Jews for Jesus or whatever this strange cult was, I was slowly, it took about 1.5 years in process, learning under Dr. Gannon, going to Israel, seeing like Messianic Passover Seders and thinking they're ridiculous, but then starting to overcome my own aversion and my family disowning me, like what you referenced earlier, which is another story, for me to begin to overcome those aversions to Messianic Judaism.
Because the goal is that when you say about having a new identity, I know that the term that was thrown around when we were young was born again. And I get it that term makes sense, being born anew. But the most important thing about finding and recognizing that God loves you enough to send his son inside time and space, wherever you are, in the timeline of eternity, he loves you enough to reach you specifically with exactly what's needed in those divine intersections. It changes who you are on the inside. And suddenly the brass ceiling that you feel like has separated you from the knowledge of God begins to open like a Torah scroll. And you suddenly start to see that there's a direct path to get to God. It's not a direct journey. It takes twists and turns, and you don't always understand how your bad decisions are still being turned around for good. But if you'll just trust that God wants to know you, that he cares about what you're going through, even when you're a child and you don't know, even when you ask about what is that I'm looking at, why can't I see that?
Right.
It's a partnership between our parents, right, raising us in what we should believe is true, and the God of the universe trying to get a hold of them at the same time. And I don't know exactly where this journey is going to lead us, but I know that I trust your faith in God and your understanding of the scripture because I've watched you grow. I've watched the path. How long were the years between when you had that moment and you and I would have met at MLR and had that experience? How many years were there in between?
So that moment was 2003, and I would have met you about 2010, I believe.
Right. So just about 7 years is what separates that experience from when you and I met. And then from there, there's almost 2 decades to get to this Bible being done. And so you have so much, you've been very blessed in that you have a sharp mind and a really open heart to the things of God. You're a worship leader. And for me, that's how I build my relationship with God, is through worship. And I look forward to more conversations where you can help us look across the generations of what brought this about, what brought this Bible about, but also what we think the trajectory is for the future for your children, my children, our children's children. We're only here for a brief time. Man is but a breath. We are here for such a brief time. But our faith has extended from generations, 1,400 years of Judaism before Yeshua comes.
Right.
There is a lot of our story that is not accessible to believers in the Bible the way that we wish that it was. We do have intel, but I don't think it's about making the Bible more complicated. I think it's about making a relationship with God easier to grasp by spending time in the Word. So would you join me again sometime and take the next step?
That sounds great.
Yeah, we'll do that together. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rabbi. We're going to get ready for our after show, and I don't know if you know this, but Shawn was one of the translators. Now, we won't tell you which book he did, but we'd love to talk about how he got this translation together. So join us for the after show, and we'll see you later. Shabbat shalom, shalom, shalom.